Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It is our 18th, I believe, show of Biscuits SEC Live, so we appreciate everybody joining us tonight. We know it's cold across the SEC footprint, so hang in there. We're cold too, but eventually we will be getting into spring. We got SEC baseball right around the corner coming up, opening day on Friday, and March Madness is also right ahead of us. So excited to get some spring weather going as well. Hammer, how you doing tonight?
Doing good. Yeah, it's I don't know if we covered it on this show, but I know we did on the SEC After Dark. But I recently moved out to Colorado. It's quite cold out here too, so I'm with everybody out there who's dealing with the cold temps. I think it's like 11 degrees outside, so I'm bundled up and staying inside.
Sounds terrible. I can't talk too much. It's about 50-something degrees in Texas. It's a little rainy and overcast, so still chilly though here. All right, tonight for our show, we have got a lot going on, sort of, not really, but mostly we're looking back on the 2024 season. We just want to talk a little bit about our grades as to, what our thoughts were on the 2024 season in terms of, just looking back, giving out grades, thinking about what these different teams were supposed to look like going into the 2024 season with the preseason, and then how they ended up and how they finished, and then just slapping a grade on that. So I did 4 from what the old SEC West would have been. We included Texas, I think, and Oklahoma in that, or maybe Missouri. We did Mizzou. So we will discuss those. I'll go through my 4. Hank will go through his 4, and then we'll also go back and forth. And, we may actually disagree with what the grades were. So we'll talk through that a little bit. But before we get into it, as always, guys, sign up for the Biscuits SEC newsletter, the Morning Biscuits newsletter. I got it out a little bit late today. Had some other stuff going on with the regular job. But every Wednesday morning in the offseason, come straight to your inbox, all the SEC news and notes that you're looking for. Right now, we're talking a lot about basketball, a lot about baseball coming up, softball as well, and women's basketball, and then keeping an eye on what's going on with recruiting in football and a bunch of other football news going on as well. So be sure to sign up for that during the season. It's on Mondays and Fridays. So, all right, let's get right into it here. We'll start with Hammer here. He's talking about Auburn. Graded D here for Auburn. Hammer, how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I almost wanted to go F, but we have seen the bottom fall out even further in recent years with Auburn. So 5 and 7 wasn't quite bad enough for an F. But the reality is, at the same time, 5 and 7 at Auburn is not good enough, right? The term C's get degrees, doesn't apply here, because 5 and 7 at Auburn doesn't pass the muster, doesn't get a degree. So I thought it was between an F for failing and a C. So I stuck them with a D, right? So again, 5 and 7 on the year, and as you said, I think it helps to have some context around it. So nobody was expecting Auburn, I don't think, coming into the season to win 10 games, compete for the SEC title, and go to the college football playoff. However, it was the second year under Hugh Freeze. I think they went 4 and 8 last year, maybe even 5 and 7. So 2 years in a row he doesn't make it to a bowl game is just not getting it done. And when you factor in how they got to 5 and 7 with a loss at home to Cal Berkeley, horrendous. They lost to Vanderbilt at home, horrendous. They lost to Arkansas at home, and they lost to Oklahoma at home. So that's 4 losses in Jordan-Hare to teams that, frankly, were not very good, right? Oklahoma goes 6 and 6, Arkansas goes 6 and 6, Vandy goes 6 and 6. I have no idea what Cal finished, but I believe it was 6 and 6, maybe 7 and 5. So you lose 4 home games to 4 painfully average teams in Hugh Freeze's second year. Really, really bad stuff. The other context I thought was worth adding was we talked a lot about it during the season, and both of these points we talked a lot about during the season. Hugh Freeze did not give Jarquez Hunter the ball enough. I think we ran this stat several times, but every time that he got 20 or more carries, they won the game. I think that was 3 times this year. I'm not really sure what he was doing there. And on the same front, Hugh Freeze decided to stick with Peyton Thorne rather than pursue a transfer portal quarterback. And in general, I'm okay with that decision, right? I think, he had just brought in Peyton Thorne. He'd only been there for a year. And Peyton Thorne was not, the only issue that Auburn had. But when you look around and you see guys like Cam Ward, for instance, make such a big impact at Miami, it does make you scratch your head a little bit that you think, okay, we saw what Peyton Thorne was last year, and you decided to run it back. And Peyton Thorne had a decent season, but he also cost them a couple of those games that I just mentioned because he turned the ball over so much. I think in the Cal game, he threw 4 or 5 interceptions. Mm-hmm. In the Oklahoma game, he threw the costly pick 6. So I think that's another coaching decision that factors into this D grade here, where it's like, man, if they would have done something a little bit different at the quarterback position, maybe they win 1 or 2 more games. And you kind of flip the narrative and you're like, hey, the trajectory is rising, right? We started, last year 4-8, 5-7. Again, I don't remember what it was. Forgive me. But this year we made a bowl. We're 6-6, or we're 7-5. But Freeze sticks with Peyton Thorne. Probably not a very good move. And so that was my overall thoughts on Auburn. What do you think? Is the D grade fair? Would you be a little more lenient or harsh?
No, I think D's right on the money. And I mean, your best win this year, looking at the schedule, is Texas A&M. Late in the year, that overtime win, 43-41 over A&M, which if I remember right, that knocked A&M out of the SEC title race. They were still kind of in it, with a lot had to happen. Well, no, it was the last game Texas A&M was going to be to go to the SEC title.
Yeah, so they were still in it. That was a big win.
But it was a big win. Yeah, it was a really big win. And, they had them. They almost blew it. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because that being your best win on the year, when you had losses to Arkansas, you had lost to Oklahoma, who was down, lost to Vanderbilt. It was not a good year on the Plains. And it was the second year in a row where it wasn't a good year on the Plains. And you hit on the 2 greatest sins of Hugh Freeze, of what he, did this year, as to why why we're here talking about a D grade for Auburn instead of the upward trajectory where we're talking a C+ or maybe a B- or something like that. And it was 1, Jarquez Hunter. Like that to me is an unforgivable sin of just how underutilized Jarquez Hunter was. And he's probably the best back in the SEC. Arguably, for sure, the best back in the SEC. So that was unforgivable to me. And then the other thing was not going to get a quarterback in the transfer portal. Now, the one redeeming thing I would say, I was thinking about this as you were talking, the one redeeming thing that Hugh Freeze did is that even though he didn't go get a transfer portal quarterback, at least he didn't go get DJ Uiagalelei.
True.
Sorry, FSU fans, but at least he didn't gamble, your money, Auburn fans, on somebody like DJU. And we've seen, transfer quarterbacks work out sometimes they don't. Either it's a big splash or it's a big dud. And at the end of the day, I think, we can kind of say that Peyton Thorne's time at Auburn was a dud. He tried to get him, going this year, and it didn't work out. Again, his numbers weren't that bad, like you said, but it was the critical errors, the critical picks. And his play just wasn't what you would expect, I would say, from, a high level program like Auburn, right? Like Auburn should have a really solid quarterback. And they haven't really had one for a while, but Peyton Thorne for sure was not that guy. So we'll see going into next year what that looks like. But they're going to have a quarterback, and we'll talk about their rival a little bit later in the show. And there was a big reason why Alabama struggled this year was because of who was under center. So D, I think, though, is fair. All right. Next up is mine, which is LSU. Um, and I give them a C- this year. And I think we could have been harsher on them, honestly, but it's kind of hard to be too harsh on a team that won 9 games and seemed to get better, as the year went on. But or at least early in the year, they were good. As the year went on, I should correct myself here. We had 3 losses late in the year, which were pretty bad. I mean, the Texas A&M game, you have Texas A&M, you have them basically in the first half, and then Marcel Reed comes out, and you have no idea, how to defend the zone read. Then you have Alabama. Alabama just blows you out of the water, and then you lose to Florida, which shouldn't have been losing to Florida. LSU is a much more talented team on paper this year than Florida was. So, I felt like going into this year. So LSU preseason, they were number 5 in terms of odds to win the SEC. They finished at the end of this season number 5 in the SEC. Top 25 ranking going into this year, they were number 13 in the first AP poll. And at the end of the year, they're not ranked. With the amount of talent that's on this roster, Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback, the wide receivers, like the offensive line that they had, there's no way that this team should not be ranked at the end of the year. So I actually thought a C- was kind of generous. And the only reason I put them at a C- was because they did end up winning, 9 games overall. But again, the biggest failure to me for LSU this year, and I think every LSU fan would agree with me here, was the defense. It really baffled me how little LSU did in the transfer portal coming into 2024 on the defensive side of the ball. They brought in Blake Baker, to try to revamp the defense, and he started to get things better. I think they're going in the right direction on defense with Blake Baker. And like I said, mid-year, I think this year on SEC After Dark a couple times, like, just wait. Like, Blake Baker, Brian Kelly's going to give him the reins and say, do whatever you have to do, spend whatever you have to spend in the transfer portal, and go get who you want to get. And that's exactly what they did this offseason. But they didn't do that going into 2024, and it was just a same thing again, where we're looking at LSU's defense just going, what is going on here? This is not at all like a Tigers defense that we're used to seeing. So I'm interested to see what it looks like in 2025 when we break in a lot of these new guys out of the transfer portal and some of these younger guys who are on the roster on the defense, because it has to get better. If they're going to be at the national championship level, right? National championship or bust, basically, is what Brian Kelly's saying for next year. If they're going to get, 10, 11, 12 wins, get into the playoff and make a run at the national title, that defense has to be exponentially better than it was this year. So what do you think? C- good enough, or would you go harsher?
No, I agree with that. I think C- is fair. I think, again, when you take into account kind of preseason expectations, or even just expectations in general in Baton Rouge, an 8-4 regular season is a C- at best. And like you said, I think there's some positives in there. At times, just overall very inconsistent, and did not get it done on defense, like you said. The offensive line I'm interested to see, where those guys end up going in the draft. I think at least 3 of them will go fairly high. I just bring that up because we brought it up all year during the regular season, but they couldn't run the ball, or at least they didn't try. So for all the, NFL draft expert or mock draft or this guy's PFF grade, it just didn't translate, at least in the run game. Now, I think Nussmeier was protected fairly well for the most part, but they just couldn't run the ball, which, again, I think is a failing of the staff, whether it's play calling or just how you assemble a roster. You have to be able to run the ball, especially at LSU. I mean, we're not very far removed from the Les Miles, and even when Ed O was there, really until I guess that 2019 year with Burrow. But this is LSU, man. We play defense and we run the ball and we're physical, and this team was not. They still won 8 games, won 9 with the bowl, but that is not the DNA of an LSU Tiger team. And I think that's as much of an indictment on, the staff as the overall record, because it just doesn't look right when they're throwing the ball 50 times a game and their defense can't tackle, can't get after the passer, can't cover. Like, it's just a weird year. So I think C- is reasonable. They had some big wins in there. They take down Ole Miss at home. They got gifted the game in South Carolina, but they did beat them, right? So a couple big wins, couple really bad losses like A&M and Bama, and I think C- is fair.
Also, the Trojans loss start of the year. That one looked worse and worse as the season went on. I mean, losing to USC out of the gate and then seeing what USC did later in the year, right? Like, I don't even remember what that team finished. I mean, they beat A&M in the bowl game, but what were they?
6-6, I think.
6-6.
They barely got to a bowl, yeah.
Yeah, that's not great. They bench Miller Moss. They make Miller Moss look like a Heisman candidate. USC benches him. He transfers out at the end of the year. So overall, pretty disappointing season in Baton Rouge. So C- it is for them. All right, let's move on now to one of the teams that the Tigers beat this year in overtime. That is the Ole Miss Rebels. So season expectations here were playoffs or bust, and it was a bust. No playoffs this year for the Rebels, but you gave them a B-, so help me out.
Yeah, I did. I'm interested to see what you think. And, even our Ole Miss contingent, I know probably a fair amount of Ole Miss fans watching this with Locked On Ole Miss and Stephen Willis, given that we work with him. So I gave him a B- because, as you mentioned, the preseason expectations were sky high. And they fell woefully short with a 9-3 regular season. I still just think, look, it's Ole Miss, right? A 9-3 regular season is a pretty good year for them, historically speaking. So I really had trouble giving them a C. They went 9-3, but they still finished, I think, 14th in the playoff ranking. So, like, your top 15 at the end of the year, I think that's a pretty good year. So I tried to factor in the preseason expectations, and like if this happens, in 2010 or something, like, it's an A, right? This is an A season. So expectations have changed. I get it. Lane Kiffin has elevated that to his credit. So I tried to factor it in. B- is what I gave him. I think, as we talked about, like, the preseason expectations were there and the talent was there too. I think that's another important distinction, is it wasn't just preseason hype for hype's sake. It was legitimate in terms of the dudes they had on the defensive line, at wide receiver, at QB with Jackson Dart. I mean, they had the talent to back up the hype. And crazy enough, they just fell short in really two games. I know they lost in overtime to LSU, but when you go play at Tiger Stadium, that's tough. And you lose in overtime. So whatever, that's going to happen. But the Kentucky and Florida games are really the two low points in the season. Obviously, you can't lose. I mean, I think I wrote it in my notes here. So Ole Miss lost 3 games, right, to LSU, Kentucky, and Florida. LSU, Kentucky, and Florida combined record was 19-17. So they lost to pretty bad teams, which is just kind of inexcusable when you have that kind of talent. So I think that's going to be the challenge for, Kiffin and the staff moving forward, is obviously to try and reload like they did in the transfer portal, and they're doing the same thing they've always done. They've got a great portal class coming in, but I don't know if it's the portal or just a 1-year kind of a fluke or snapshot, but like, for years, Ole Miss was beating the teams they should beat, and then they get beat by Bama and Georgia, or they get beat by, Bama and LSU. It was kind of the opposite this year, right? They beat Georgia at home, like, great game at Vaught Hemingway, beat the crud out of them, 28-10, not even a close game. And then they lose to Florida, and they lose to Kentucky. So, I kind of struggled with it, but I think B- is ultimately fair. Again, you're 9-3, you finish in the top 15, you're just on the outside of the college football playoff. Fell short of preseason expectations, but overall, still a good year. There's a lot of fan bases that would take a 9-3 regular season.
I think that's true. I think it's kind of, be careful what you wish for kind of thing, right? Like expectations get raised and then you start, comparing yourself to the expectation and kind of forget, kind of who you are. Hey, look, we're Aggie fans, right? Like we get that. we understand expectations get raised and then, and we all have inflated expectations, sometimes for sure.
Yeah.
However, I would say, for good reason have the expectations been raised. And I think Ole Miss fans have an absolute right to be extraordinarily frustrated with how this year went. Lane Kiffin asked for, for me, I would give him probably a C, maybe even a C- grade on this season because Ole Miss fans, the Grove Collective, everything, right? They gave Lane Kiffin everything that he wanted, everything from the money to the players, right? They're working on like facilities, like everything is there for Ole Miss to win. And he had what he needed to elevate it. And everyone knew that it was at a minimum playoffs or bust this year. And our friend Stephen Willis, he talked about it a lot, right? This is the best roster that Ole Miss has ever constructed. This is the best roster in the SEC. He was right. It was the best roster in the SEC. So to me, like, it's inexcusable that Ole Miss lost these games. Florida was just coming off getting absolutely boat raced by Texas. Boat raced by Texas, right? DJ Lagway, I know, is going to be a star. And he was starting to show that late in the year. So it's tough to really harp on that too much and talk about, Ole Miss, giving that one up. However, you also have to remember DJ Lagway was not 100% in that game. He couldn't run. He was on one leg, right? And he still carved him up. The Ole Miss offense for only scoring 17 points against the Gators defense that gave up 40 to Texas is inexcusable. Lane Kiffin's the offensive guy. He's the offensive genius. How are you scoring 17 points against that Florida defense? It's inexcusable. The LSU loss, I'm with you. The LSU loss, that happens, right? It's the SEC. LSU's a good team, even though LSU was, 9-4 overall this year, 8-4 regular season. Like, it's okay to lose to LSU. It happens. Kentucky loss, inexcusable, man. Kentucky's quarterback was so bad that he retired at the end of the year. What are we doing? I think one of the biggest things that actually hurt Ole Miss, looking back on the 2024 season is lack of a true running game. I think that Quinshon Judkins leaving to go to Ohio State ended up hurting Ole Miss a lot more than people thought it might heading into the season. And it, it weighed on Jackson Dart a little bit, not having Trey Harris for times during this year. He was hurt a lot of the year. That hurt, but yeah, I probably would have gone Ole Miss at a C or C- this year for those reasons. I think that they had everything they needed. They had the Ferrari, even without Trey Harris for a lot of the year. You have, Juice Wells, who, what did he do, man?
MIA.
Like, what the hell was going on there, right? Like,
he got lost.
He got completely lost, and partly that's because there was so much talent on that roster. But it wasn't always utilized in good ways. I think Lane Kiffin relied way too much on the analytics. Stephen Willis, our friend, he always said this too, right? That Ole Miss needs to start playing like we're the alpha dog. We need to start playing like we're going to get up big, right? Like we need to be pressing the gas and not relying on gimmicks and analytics and all this stuff to, try to beat teams because we're the dog. Like we don't need to. And he was right. So, I probably would have given Ole Miss a little bit less of a grade.
I think that's fair. I think, again, maybe my B- is a little lenient there. When I look at the snapshot of this year versus the sort of just overall historical, a top 15 finish is not bad. But I agree. I think you brought up a really good point about the run game. I do think that hurt them a lot. I think Judkins – and look, I know when he left, Ole Miss fans even some of their team, it seemed like, was not mad about it. So I'm not going to discount the fact that maybe he was not like the best teammate or best guy to be around. However, to your point, on the field, he was missed. I mean, in that Florida game, my best friend went to Ole Miss, so he's a diehard fan, and I kept hearing about this. They ran J.J. Pegues, the defensive tackle, off tackle like 5 times and kept getting stuff. Now, granted, I know that had been working all year, and he had a bunch of rushing touchdowns, but clearly Florida was ready for it. And Ole Miss had no counter. They're like, exactly what you said, like, hey, we're going to keep going for these 4th downs. And the only thing we can do in 4th and short is hand off to our defensive tackle or direct snap to him is what they were doing. And like they had no changeup. It was like, here's our fastball, and Florida just keeps hitting it out of the park, swatting it like, nope, we're going to stuff you here. We're going to stuff you here. Turnover on downs. And because I think the loss of Judkins is like Kiffin and Ole Miss didn't have anywhere to turn. So some disagreement there, which I think is fair on the Ole Miss one, given, you know, the expectations, the hype coming into the year, and then how it ultimately went, juxtaposed to a 9-3 finish at Ole Miss historically is good. And I think that, you know, just thinking about the outlook for Ole Miss, right? Like Kiffin has elevated the program. And so as long as he's there, I expect them to kind of be in that conversation year in and year out, right? I'm not saying they're going to make the 12 team every year or go to Atlanta every year, but that's a team that you should expect to win 8 to 10 games a year, right? Some years they're going to win 8, some they're going to win 9, some they're going to win 10, go. But that's a team that's going to be competitive, I think, as long as Kiffin is around and the transfer portal is what it is.
I think so too. And I know we've seen him in limited action, but Austin Simmons looks like a real threat when he, you know, steps in for Jackson Dart heading into next year. That kid is super talented. So.
Yeah, well, I think we already know what the national championship next year will be, because Brian Kelly has declared that LSU will be there, and Austin Simmons also declared that they will be there. So Rebels, Tigers, get ready for a you know, deep South Mississippi versus Louisiana national title wherever it is next year.
I'm in for that. That would be a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. You want to move on? We'll go. We'll go to one of yours here. Man, let's go Bama. Right. Let's hit the big one.
Let's do it. So another team that underperformed. I got the wrong grade here. I don't know why I said that. So it's definitely not an A. I think I forgot to update this one.
Everybody's thrilled with Kalen DeBoer.
First year, A. It would have been an A+ if they won the national title, but going 9-4, that's just an A in Titletown. No, that is definitely not an A in Titletown. So to correct the record here, as I look like I didn't fix up our banner here, but I gave him a B-. If I had a telestrator, I could write B- on here, but I don't have that fancy tool. But B- for Bama this year. I think that might even be a little high, but I gave him a B-. And the reason I did, I gave Kalen DeBoer just a little bit of cushion there because it's the first year. First year of Kalen DeBoer coming into Tuscaloosa, following the GOAT, right? Like there's high expectations, a lot left in the portal before this season, right? Like there was some turnover there. The roster wasn't as deep as it has been in years past, which some in T-Town say that that's partly a reason why Saban was, you know, like, okay, time to retire, was because he knew that the roster he had in that last year was going to be probably his best final shot at a national title. And he was not so sure about the roster he had coming into 24. So, yeah, I just give a little cushion. Now, to me, this season really is one. It was a total roller coaster, right? You win against Georgia, you're looking like really good. I mean, the win against Wisconsin early in the year, 42-10. Georgia, you get this crazy win, the Ryan Williams catch, and then the next week you go to Vanderbilt and you lose to Vanderbilt in something that should literally never happen. Like, I don't care how good Vanderbilt is. Alabama does not lose to Vanderbilt, right? So that was not great. Then you almost get punched in the mouth by South Carolina. South Carolina is this close to taking you out. Next week, you lose to Tennessee, 24-17. Then you turn around and you kick the ever-loving crap out of Missouri, 34-0. And everybody's like, okay, well, they're righting the ship, right? Like, okay, playoffs, they're going to be in the playoffs, no problem, right? Then they kick the ever-loving crap out of LSU. And then you turn around and you lose to Oklahoma, who ends the year 6-6, one of the worst Oklahoma teams that we've seen in a long time. And, everybody's just sitting there scratching their heads like, you can't pin this team. Like, what? You can't pin it down as to what they're going to play week to week. And, so much of football now, especially college football, you go as your quarterback goes, right? These aren't the days of like the Nick Saban teams where it's Jake Coker or Blake Sims or like those guys who can win you a national title. You have to have a quarterback who is the best player on the team, likely the best player on the team, minimum top 5 player on the team, and someone who is a really solid player, right? Leader in the locker room type. Like, these game managers don't win you national titles anymore. And your team goes as your quarterback goes. And this year, that was what Alabama found out, right? Like, Jalen Milroe's season this year, total roller coaster. Looks like a Heisman candidate through the Georgia game, and then he looks like he should be the third stringer in other games. And so it was a total roller coaster of a season, in large part because of what was going on under center with Jalen Milroe. And for whatever reason, he and Kalen DeBoer just were not on the same page most of the year. Jalen Milroe's superbly talented. He's an extremely athletic guy. Sounds like he's refusing to play running back in the NFL. He might be better off served as a running back, but sometimes he throws a ball that you're just like, wow, he reminds me a lot. I've said this to a couple folks. He reminds me so much of Anthony Richardson. The good tape just pops off the screen. Extremely impressive, extremely athletic. Some of the balls he throws, you're just like, that was super impressive, strong arm.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, not the best decision maker, not always the most accurate. Has trouble, with the reads. He's one read and then he, one, maybe two. And then, if he doesn't have his first read, he's having trouble. He's scrambling, he's getting sacked, whatever. And that, I think he's lost a little bit of confidence. I think he lost a little bit of confidence late in the year, which really affected the entire team. So anyway, not an A, B- for Bama. Do you agree there? Or would you go lower, higher? What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go lower. So similar to sort of, you were going lower on Ole Miss. I would go lower on Bama. I think I would give them a C or a C- because my first thought is kind of what you brought up, the losses and who they were to, right? You can't lose to Vanderbilt at Alabama, just inexcusable. And then Oklahoma. Not only was Oklahoma bad this year at 6-6, they lost 24-3, didn't score an offensive touchdown. And that kind of leads me to my next point, which was why I would give them a lower grade as well, is I know Kalen DeBoer was up against it, given it's his first year following the best coach we've ever seen, and it was late in the cycle, right? By the time he got to Alabama, the portal was closed. It was open for his team because when you have a head coaching change, there's 30 days, but he could not bring anybody in because the rest of the portal had been shut down. So I understand he was in a tough spot, but he's an offensive coach, and their offense was not very good. All the inconsistencies you brought up with Milroe, I kind of put that on him because Milroe looked better the previous year. He looked better under Tommy Rees. Yes. Than DeBoer, who has a track record of being great with quarterbacks. He sent Michael Penix, to New York in the Heisman ceremony and got all the way to a title game. So ultimately, we will see if that was just a bad fit in terms of Milroe's strengths versus what DeBoer likes in a quarterback, and he just was kind of stuck with him because he's the incumbent starter. And like you said, he's got a ton of talent, so I'm sure in practice he looks great. But I put a lot of that on DeBoer to just think that, hey, man, you're an offensive guy. You got to figure something out to play to this guy's strengths. In some games they would. And then other games, not only wouldn't they, it looked like they didn't know how to run offense at all. And so I'd probably give them at best a C. Especially, too, again, I think one other thing to kind of ding them and try and justify my lower grade here is they couldn't run the ball either. I brought that up with LSU. Bama had the same problem. Jalen Milroe was their leading rusher by far. Traditional ground game, very, very bad. And I don't know if that's offensive line. I think a lot of it is. Some of it maybe is running back. But they have some pretty talented guys up front as well that did not produce. And, I think first year or not, head coach at Alabama, you should be able to figure out how to run the ball with a running back consistently, and they couldn't do that. So I'd go a little bit lower, but I understand where you're coming from with the first-year coach.
Yeah, and the only reason too I gave him the B minus versus the C was being on the verge of the playoffs. Hey, look, it's pretty bad losing to Michigan in the bowl game, but before the bowl game, they were the last team out, right?
Right.
A lot of people saying, hey, it should have been Alabama over, Clemson, LSU, whatever, and then Clemson essentially knocks them out when they win the ACC over SMU.
Right.
So, right on the cusp of the playoff, even with all of those issues that we just talked about for Alabama was why I went B+. But I think it's totally fair to go C or below, just because of the expectations at Alabama, the way that they use Jalen Milroe's play, Jalen Milroe in the offense, the running game issues. All that said, Alabama well below their expectations for this year. So, all right, let's go to one that is completely on the opposite end of the spectrum of all these teams, which is the Mississippi State Bulldogs. I don't think we have to spend too much time on it. I don't even think Mississippi State fans want us to spend too much time on it, although maybe the Ole Miss fans watching us, because there's plenty of those, do want us to continue just to dog on the dogs. But give me your reasoning. F for Mississippi State. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, as you said, this one will be quick, and we need to kind of speed things up anyway with a few more teams left. Yeah, this is an F. 2-10 overall, 0-8 in the SEC. I know it's Jeff Levy's first year. I know with the transfer portal, as we just talked about with DeBoer, it's very hard on first-year coaches. 2-10, never, under no circumstances, is acceptable, even at a school like Mississippi State that doesn't traditionally, win a ton of ball games. You lose at home to Toledo, 41-17. Your wins are against Eastern Kentucky and UMass. I mean, this is an F all around. They got blown out a lot. And then cherry on top, Michael Van Buren transfers after the season because they're flirting with Levy's old pal, Jackson Arnold from OU in the portal. So I know they got the FSU guy, Croman Hoke, and they have a decent portal class with 24 guys. So maybe there's some optimism, but as far as last season goes, that's an F all around.
Yeah, not much else to add. It was a total disaster. It was ugly. I thought, late in the year they were showing some signs of life with Van Buren. They played Georgia, not close, but close-ish, right? The score, you look at it, you're kind of like, huh. They played Texas close for a half, but then, the wheels just fell off again there late in the year. And Van Buren really was the only bright spot, along with a couple of receivers like Mario Craver. But
gone too.
Who left too? Yeah, I mean, any of the guys who were decent, this year on that team, pretty much left.
Yeah,
and the Van Buren thing, that could end up defining Levy's time there at Mississippi State. That's one of those things that happens. That's like for us Aggies, that's a Kyler Murray, Kyle Allen type of thing where it's a flashpoint, a lever, kind of a leverage point in a program. It's early, I know, with Levy, it's only year one. But if Michael Van Buren goes on to star at LSU and take over for Garrett Nussmeier, I'm not sure how you live that one down, especially if Croman Hoke doesn't end up being any good. Hopefully he is. And hopefully there's some hope there in Starkville. But yeah, this year, F is totally fair. All right, next we'll move on to the Aggies. So this one was me. I gave the Aggies a B. I think you probably could go lower. You could probably even make an argument for higher. I mean, B, I think, is kind of right in the middle there. Expectations to start this year, right, were I think they started the year ranked 20th in the AP poll. End the year not ranked. And I think the biggest reason, a lot of Aggies fans would probably say, oh, it should be lower than that. Like it should be a C, it should be a C minus. And I think you can make an argument for that. I mean, to me, though, starting year one, 7-1, after you have your starting quarterback go down and then get supplanted after he comes back because he's just, not playing well, but then to still go 7-1 with Marcel Reed, having to play all that, QB shuffle there early in the year, get to 7-1 and you're on the verge. You have an SEC title berth right there for the taking in year one of Mike Elko, somewhere they never got under Jimbo Fisher, right? Like there was one year, right? The 2020 year, where they were on the verge of the playoff and then, on the verge of the SEC championship game. But so they got kind of close under Jimbo, but overall, they didn't even close to it in year one under Jimbo. And we're here in year one under Mike Elko after Jimbo kind of left a train wreck at the end of his tenure. And Mike Elko comes in and, brings in a big portal class and gets to 7-1 and still has the Aggies on the verge of the SEC title game going into the Texas game, the final game of the year. So for that reason, I gave him a B. Now, on the flip side, if you want to argue for, going lower, I think you can argue, right, that this is just A&M. Texas 8-4. Put it in the comments. We know Texas 8-4. We're at the same place that we always are, and then it's also almost going back to a different era of Aggie football that was Kevin Sumlin. Kevin Sumlin's tenures were marked by fast starts and then ugly, unbelievable collapses at the end of the year. And that's kind of what you got with this A&M team. You had a fast start. Marcel Reed comes out. He plays extremely well against Florida. They rip off 7 straight wins after losing to Notre Dame to start the year. And then the wheels come off, right? Like you lose to Auburn in quadruple overtime, which you had no business losing to that Auburn team this year. They ended up 5-7, right? Yep. You should have handed them another loss. They should have been 4-8. You should not have lost to that Auburn team. You lose to Texas, but while Texas was a playoff team and a very good team, very good roster, you have them at home, and you get so many breaks in that game. It's unbelievable, and you only score 7 points offensively. You block a punt. You have a pick six. I mean, every break in the book went your way, and you lose that game in ugly fashion. So there is an argument for sure. And then I guess the final argument to go below a B would be the defense. Jay Bateman's defense, with all the talent that they had, significantly underperformed. It was terrible, which is why you saw Elko after the USC game, after the bowl game, come out and say, the thing I'm most glad about this year is that I don't ever have to watch that defense play again. It's like that to me was pretty bad, especially with Mike Elko being a defensive guy, right? Mike Elko, known as a defensive coach, and that's the defense they put on the field in year one with all the talent that they had. No surprise, really, that it looks like he's going to be taking over the defense going into 25. So, yeah. Overall, all that said, I kind of sit right in the middle. I think you can make an argument that, for a B plus, maybe an A minus, and then I think you can make an argument for a C minus. So I kind of, went down the middle there and went B for Mike Elko's first year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I might go B minus. So very, very close to you. I agree with kind of everything you said. The collapse at the end is tough, but you still start 7-1. And I think, look, 8-4 in general, especially at A&M, because that's a hump that, we have to try to get over, right, as you mentioned, would ordinarily be a C for me. However, I do think there's some important context in that one of those losses came week one against Notre Dame that ultimately went all the way to the national title game. So it's not like A&M played a cupcake out-of-conference schedule and then went 4-4 in the SEC. They actually had a winning record in conference at 5-3, which is not typical for A&M, if we're being honest, over their tenure in the SEC. So look, going 5-3 in conference in year one, and then your out-of-conference loss being to the second best team in the country, I suppose, is not that bad. The only reason I wouldn't give them a B like you did, I'm going to be a little more harsh here, is because, they lost to Texas at home in a game that was right there. And that's, as an Aggie, right, that's a game, like, I've never wanted a game more. We talked so much trash for a decade as a Longhorns fans. I mean, this is not unique to A&M, but we had them, right? It's at home in our building for a shot to go to Atlanta in the SEC title game, and we got physically dominated and lost. So with that said, I can't give them a B. I'll give them a B minus.
Yeah, I get that. One thing to add that I would just reinforce my B grade here is, I think I'm right on this because I believe LSU, I think, was number 8 at the time when the Aggies beat them, and Mizzou was number 10.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 top 10 wins in year one. We have to go back. I think that's as much as Jimbo Fisher in his entire tenure at Texas A&M. He might have gotten one more. He might have had 3. He had Alabama, and he had Florida, top 5 Florida in Kyle Field. But he might have had one more top 10 win. Anyway, Mike Elko in year one, 2 top 10 wins. That's pretty good. So some good, some bad for the Aggies. So B minus for Hammer there, B for Bossman. All right, let's head over to their rivals. Good little segue there. Texas.
Yeah.
Give him an A.
I did give him an A. Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, well, I guess there's 2 things that held them back from an A+, and I would say that is A, they didn't win the SEC. They got to the game, didn't win it, and then they ultimately, didn't get any further than they got last year, right? I think it's certainly still possible to have an A+ season and not win a natty. There's not only one A+ given out, but they didn't advance any further. They made it to the playoffs again, so I gave them an A. Look, you go to back-to-back Final Fours, I guess, whatever we would call it these days, right? College football playoff semifinals. They had an 11-1 regular season in their first season in the SEC. Granted, it was one of the easiest SEC schedules I've ever seen. There's my Aggie homer coming out. But, again, we talked about this ad nauseum during the season. They took care of business. We've been going down the line here of teams that lost games they shouldn't have lost. Alabama, A&M, Ole Miss, LSU, losing to teams that weren't that good. Texas did not. They lost to Georgia in the regular season, and then they lost to them again in Atlanta, and then ultimately they lost to the national champions, Ohio State. So I don't know how you look at what Texas did this year and say, like, anything below an A, and, even if you want to go A+, I think that's fair. I just, I held them back from the A+ because they lost to Georgia in Atlanta, didn't get the SEC title, and only made it as far as they did. And one thing, too, about that game, their 2 losses to Georgia, one was bad in Austin. It was not a close game, not a competitive game. And the second one kind of gave that one away, right? You're in Atlanta, you have the lead, and you knock Carson Beck out of the game, and Gunnar Stockton comes in, who's never played basically in his life, and he somehow leads them to a comeback. So for whatever reason, they couldn't get over the Georgia boogeyman this year. But again, 11-1, you win 2 playoff games. Like, that's a hell of a season in Austin, especially given where they had been before Sark got there. Texas fans, I'm sure, are quick to forget, as I would be as an Aggie as well. So I'm not throwing shade, because if we started going to college football playoffs in Atlanta, I'd forget too. But this program was not good for over a decade, really, between Mack Brown and Sark. So for Sark to come in there, go 5-7, I I think 8-4, and then the last 2 years 11-1 is extremely impressive. And I think as long as he's there, they are going to be in the hunt, and they're going to be winning between 9 and 11 games a year.
Yeah, I would. I'd be a little harsher on them. I would give them an F-, just for being Texas. But in all seriousness, I think A is probably right. I think I might go A-, for a couple reasons, and these are like finding chinks in the armor, right? It's like they're more like little dents. We're not finding chinks; we're finding little dents in the armor here because, like you said, it was 11-1. Hard to knock too much when you make the college football playoff semifinals, and are on the verge of the college football playoff final, the title game. So, I would say though that Sark is supposed to be this offensive genius, right? He's the offensive guy. We all remember all the teams in Alabama with the motion and the scheme and everything. Like, the guy is just a master at scheming people open. He's great at developing quarterbacks. This year wasn't that. Like, we're in the third year of Quinn Ewers, and I think the talent level of Texas got them over the hump a lot of times. They just out-talented people. Winning against Arkansas,
especially their schedule, yeah,
20-10. What are we doing? Beating Texas A&M 17-7 when they had every chance to beat them 31-7. Like, there was just something that was a little bit off about Texas this year, and that includes in the playoffs, right? I mean, for some reason there wasn't a killer instinct with this Texas team. Look at the Arizona State game, right? I mean, Arizona State, they have them dead to rights in the first half. They're kicking their teeth in. And then they just go missing. The offense goes missing for a quarter and a half, almost 2 quarters, until they finally, get it going in overtime to win. Like, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to I really like that point you brought up about killer instinct, because I think a team that has killer instinct is Georgia. And I think Texas, talent-wise, as you said, was better than Georgia this year, right? Yeah. Georgia had no wide receivers. Their running back room was kind of shaky. Like, this was not a 2020, 2021, 2022 Georgia team in terms of upper end talent, but they have killer instinct. And as you mentioned, when those two matched up, Georgia got the best of them both times because Texas just couldn't put them away in the title game, and then wasn't flat out ready in the game in Austin. So go ahead, but I really like that killer instinct point.
Well, I mean, just to harp on that for a second more, like, their 3 losses came against teams with what? The killer instinct, right? Georgia, like you just talked about. Georgia, for years, that is their MO under Kirby Smart. Like, those guys, they step pedal to the metal. They're coming full force at you, and they've got that killer instinct. And they also, like Ohio State, same thing, right? Ohio State this year, at least late in the year, right? Not through the whole year, but they had that killer instinct, and you saw that right when you get the sack, fumble, scoop and score at the end of the game. That is the jugular, right? So Texas maybe needs to learn a little bit of that killer instinct in order to get that A+, A for me, grade next year, because that seemed to be, and maybe that's leadership of Quinn Ewers. I mean, I'm not a Quinn Ewers hater. I think the guy is a really solid player. I think he's very talented. Of course, he's got, a couple flaws. Texas fans, though, it drove them nuts with how inexpressive he was. Very kind of just a quiet, unassuming leader, steady, instead of someone who shows a lot of emotion, someone who gets really amped up, someone who's, really just kind of uplifting for a team. He's just very even keeled. And so maybe it was partly that. I don't know. But I would give Texas an A- this year for the fact that they didn't have that killer instinct. Their offense really did underperform all year for the amount of talent that they had, and for the fact that Sark is supposed to be that offensive genius. And then overall expectations, right? Like, you made the playoffs last year, you made the semifinals last year. Like, semifinals with this roster is not what we were shooting for. We were shooting for the national title game at a minimum, and a national title is where we were going. So for me, it's an A-.
Yeah, no, I think all that's fair. Like you said, at that level, you're certainly nitpicking, but I think everything you brought up is legitimate. And, you want to dock him a little bit, give him an A-. I think that's fair. And I think a lot of Texas fans would probably agree, right? Because what you just said at the end there kind of is all you need to know that, yeah, we were really hoping to get further than we got last year, and that didn't happen. So,
right. All right, we'll finish it off here with the Razorbacks, Arkansas. So this one was me. I gave them a C. I think there's an argument to be made for somewhere in the D range. However, you still got to 7 wins. You weren't 500. You're above 500. And that is with a massive roster turnover going into this season. They're going to have another massive roster turnover going into next year as well. I don't know what is happening there in Fayetteville. If players are just sick of playing for Sam Pittman, they don't like playing for Sam Pittman, or if there's some negative recruiting going on and they're losing players from tampering, Sam Pittman's going to get fired, he's going to retire, whatever. I don't know what the deal is, but there's a lot of turnover going on. But anyway, I went above a D and gave them a C just because of getting to 7 wins. Getting the Tennessee win was huge. But, you can't get above that really because the turnovers were tough again this year, right? Like the turnovers killed Arkansas in big spots this year. And it's also tough because talk about another team that doesn't have a killer instinct. Arkansas had many close games this year, including 3 that were within a touchdown that were winnable at different stages of the game, like definitely winnable games that Arkansas probably should have won. The Oklahoma State game, they were up, 21-7 at halftime? Come on, guys. Can't lose that game. Then you lose to A&M. You lose to them by 4. You had A&M on the ropes. You had them again. I mean, for how many years are we going to say this? We're going to be saying this for time in memoriam. You've got A&M on the ropes. You've got them by the throat on the wall, and you just can't finish the job. Texas, they lose by 10 to Texas, and they lose by 7 to Mizzou. So there was some optimism there. But if you're going to get more than a C grade, if you're going to finish the year in the top 25, if you're going to go to a better bowl game, you got to win those close games. And Arkansas this year just wasn't able to do it, except for the Tennessee game, right, where they did win that game and get a great win. So C, it was a C for me for the Razorbacks this year. Where would you go with it?
Yeah, I'm in lockstep with that. I think 6-6 regular season, pretty dang average. And so a C is perfectly fine. I think that Oklahoma State game is the one that really, really hurt them, from getting a better grade or going 7-5, because not only did they have them because they were dominating that football game, but come to find out, Oklahoma State stunk. That team was not good. So that game hurts, right? When you look at the rest of their schedule, as you mentioned, their other losses was to A&M, who they always lose to LSU, all right, to Ole Miss, all right, to Texas, all right, and to Missouri. Like, all those teams are better than Arkansas. So those I can understand, and I'm not going to dock you too bad unless you're really getting blown out, which most of the time they didn't. Some of them they did, but they about 50-50 with competitive games versus total blowouts. But that Oklahoma State game, the way it played out and the team that Oklahoma State turned out to be is really the game that killed them. And yeah, I think, look, I don't know what to make of Arkansas moving forward. As you mentioned, there's a ton of roster turnover for a couple years in a row now, and I just think it's one of those things they're stuck in neutral right now. And I hope Sam Pittman can turn it around. Seems like a great dude, very likable, had a lot of goodwill with the fan base, especially early on in his tenure when I think it was 9 games. He won 9 games in year 2, and since that, they've just kind of been really average. I think, you probably last year would have given them a D at best. And so this year they were slightly better, back up to a C. But it's just tough to get very excited, I would say, about the team, the staff. It's Pittman.
The investment.
Right. So, yeah, I think C's totally fine. I'm very interested to see where this goes. I mean, look, maybe, I don't know. Maybe we need to have an Arkansas fan on to talk about this, because I know when they brought Petrino back, everybody was excited. And not that their offense was bad. I think it was, pretty decent, but it wasn't great. And I kind of look at it now, and I now that we're, a year into it, and I've taken a step back, and I'm like, okay, Petrino was at A&M the year before. A&M's offense was not very good. A lot of that had to do with Jimbo, but Petrino was still there. He goes to Arkansas. Their offense is pretty good, okay, but are you really that pumped about the guy anymore? I mean, he's a retread from 2011. And you go 6-6, and your offense is pretty inconsistent. Pittman's still the head coach. Just like I was saying, where's the excitement? Yeah, it was exciting last year, but now you've seen it for a year, and I'm not a fan, so maybe they're still jazzed up about Petrino. But I would kind of look at it and be like, hold on, the fog is cleared here. Did we really bring this guy back and go 6-6? Where's our direction?
Yeah, we might have to take the pulse of the Arkansas fan base. I just think some apathy has set in. Lethargy. It's lethargic, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with what's going on with Hunter Yurachek as the AD. I think people are really fed up with the way that he has handled a couple different situations, from the Sam Pittman situation to the NIL situation to Musselman leaving for USC. Now, he brought in, a big-time coach coming from Kentucky, bringing in Coach Cal. But, that's also not going that great. So
I was going to say it.
Yeah.
I don't think this will happen, but it kind of feels like a Jimbo Fisher hire with Coach Cal.
Yeah.
He won a title a decade ago.
Yeah.
Big name, swagger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of with you there. That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, it's tough, you're a team like Arkansas, Texas and Oklahoma come in, and whether it's fair or not, whether you believe it or not, just historically speaking, that knocks you down a peg in the pecking order. So I do think there's some apathy there, and it's tough to get excited about a team that feels like they're going to go 6-6, 5-7, and you want to get excited about it. And we'll see. I mean, to close this out on a high note as we try to wrap here, I do think Talon Green showed a lot of potential. And I'm not saying Petrino's, a bad OC. He certainly can dial it up. So in year 2, maybe we'll see a big jump for him at QB, and that could be the difference. That could be the difference between going 5-7 and winning 7 or 8 games and kind of building something, because, he's very athletic. So it's possible that he figures some things out, and in year 2 of the system, everyone's year 2 in Petrino's system, they find some stuff, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right. That's it for our grade show here on the SEC West. Next week we'll go through the East, so we'll head east. We'll go Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Vanderbilt, all those good folks out there. So we'll give our grades for the SEC East next week, the old SEC East, and we hope you guys will tune in for that. We'll be on again at 7:00 Eastern, 6:00 Central next Wednesday. Also, one programming note just for folks to remember: this offseason, SEC After Dark is going to be on Thursday nights. So SEC After Dark Thursday nights, not Wednesday. So tomorrow night and Thursday nights going forward, same time as usual for SEC After Dark. It'll be at 9:00 Eastern, 8:00 Central. So we hope you guys will tune in for that tomorrow. Also, Biscuits and SEC newsletter right down here. You can sign up for that. The Morning Biscuits newsletter, biscuitsndsec.com/newsletter. Go ahead and sign up for that. All the SEC news that you can handle in your inbox on Wednesdays during the off season, Mondays and Fridays during the season. And then Finally, on social media, we're at Biscuits and SEC. So Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. Go find us there and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. Just look us up at Biscuits and SEC. Hit that bell for when we are on Wednesdays. We look forward to seeing you guys next week and appreciate you guys tuning in. For Hammer, I'm Bossman. See you guys next week.
Peace out. Appreciate y'all.